The porcelain plate was a field of perfect white, and on it, the food was a work of art. A single piece of grilled sea bass, its skin crisped to a golden lattice, sat beside a fan of avocado and a glistening jewel of salmon roe. It was a meal that cost more than most people made in a week, prepared by a chef whose hands were insured for $1 million. And the man for whom it was made could not touch it. Tatsuya Ishikawa sat at the head of a long, dark table in a room that felt more like a mausoleum than a dining hall. His face, a mask of controlled stillness, gave nothing away, but his hands, resting on the polished wood, were clenched into fists so tight the knuckles were bloodless. Outside, Tokyo hummed with life, a vibrant, electric beast. Inside this fortress of concrete and glass, there was only silence, thick and suffocating. His second-in-command, a man named Masaru, stood by the wall, his own stomach churning with a familiar dread. For 6 months, it had been this way. Ever since the attempt. Ever since the poison that had taken 3 of his men and nearly Tatsuya himself. The doctors had cleared him physically, but something inside him, some fundamental trust in the world, had been severed. Food was no longer nourishment. It was a threat. Every plate was a potential vessel of betrayal. He stared at the fish, and his mind replayed the searing pain, the violent convulsions, the look in the eyes of his trusted captain as he, too, realized what had been done. What Tatsuya did not know, as he pushed the plate away with a barely perceptible movement, was that a world away from this cold, sterile perfection, a woman was packing a worn suitcase. Her name was Amara Washington, and she was not a warrior or a strategist. She was a cook, and she was about to walk into the heart of the lion's den, armed with nothing more than an old family recipe for beef stew. If you are new here, I would be so grateful if you would subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Now, let us get into it. Amara had been hired by Masaru in an act of quiet desperation. The agency had sent over a dozen candidates, all with impeccable resumes, all trained in the finest culinary schools in Japan and Europe. Each had failed. They had presented Tatsuya with exquisite creations, and each time, he had refused to eat, his paranoia a wall they could not breach. Amara's file was different. There was no prestigious school, no list of 5-star restaurants. There was only a lifetime of cooking in church kitchens, community centers, and for the last 10 years, as a private cook for an elderly American businessman in Tokyo. The man had passed away, leaving her with a glowing reference and no job. When Masaru met her, he saw not a chef, but a presence. She was a large woman, with a calm that seemed to absorb the anxiety in the room. Her hands were capable, her eyes were kind, and when she spoke, her voice was a low, soothing melody. "He will not eat," Masaru had told her, his tone blunt. "The problem is not the food. It is in his head," Amara had simply nodded. "Sometimes," she'd replied softly, "the head needs to be reminded of what the heart already knows." He hired her on the spot, a gamble born of having no other cards to play. Her first day, she walked into the state-of-the-art kitchen, a gleaming chrome and steel laboratory. The head chef, a man named Kenji, regarded her with unconcealed disdain. He gestured to the pantries, stocked with truffles and saffron and ingredients Amara had only ever read about. She ignored them all. She sent a security guard to a local market with a simple list: beef, carrots, potatoes, onions, a little flour, some rice. She found a heavy-bottomed pot in the back of a cupboard, old and well-used. And she began to cook. The smell was the first thing that broke the spell. It was not the delicate, complex aroma of haute cuisine. It was rich and deep and honest. It smelled of home. It crept out of the kitchen and down the silent hallways, a ghost of warmth in a cold, dead place. When it was ready, she did not plate it on fine china. She ladled the thick, dark stew into a simple ceramic bowl, chipped at the rim, and placed it next to a scoop of perfectly steamed white rice. She carried the tray herself, walking past the disapproving Kenji and the stunned guards, directly to the dining hall. Tatsuya looked up as she entered, his eyes cold and empty. She placed the bowl before him and stepped back. "It is just stew, sir," she said. "And rice." Tatsuya stared at the humble offering. The steam rising from the bowl carried a scent that bypassed his mind and went straight to a place of memory he had long since buried. It smelled like his mother's kitchen on a cold winter evening, a lifetime ago, before the tattoos and the bloodshed, before the empire of fear he had built around himself. His guards tensed, expecting the bowl to be dismissed like all the others. Masaru held his breath. For a full minute, Tatsuya did not move. He was the most powerful man in Tokyo's underworld, a man who could order death with a flicker of his eyes, and he was being challenged by a bowl of stew. He picked up the spoon. The metal felt heavy, alien in his hand. He dipped it into the stew, lifting a piece of tender beef and carrot. He raised it to his lips, hesitated, and then he ate. A profound stillness settled over the room. The flavor was simple. It was not challenging or innovative. It was just good. It was warm. It tasted of nourishment, of care, of something real and unpretentious in a life built on artifice and danger. He took another bite, and then another. He ate the stew, and then he ate the rice, using the last of it to wipe the bowl clean. He ate until there was nothing left. He set the spoon down with a soft click that echoed in the silence, like a gunshot. He looked at Amara, truly looked at her for the first time. His gaze was intense, analytical, searching for the trick, the angle. He found none. He saw only a woman standing with a quiet dignity, her hands clasped before her. He turned his gaze to Masaru. "What is her name?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Amara Washington, Oyabun." Tatsuya nodded slowly. He looked back at the empty, chipped bowl. "From now on," he declared, the words carrying the weight of an unbreakable decree, "she cooks for me." Only her. The other chefs were dismissed that afternoon. The gleaming, million-dollar kitchen became Amara's domain. And in that fortress of silence and fear, a seed of trust, fragile and tentative, had been planted. It was a change that would save his life, and in doing so, place hers in the gravest danger. The routine settled into a quiet rhythm. Every day, Amara would cook for Tatsuya. Simple, hearty meals. Roasted chicken, thick soups, savory pies, baked fish. And every day, he would eat every last bite. He rarely spoke to her beyond a quiet "thank you," but his eyes would follow her as she entered and left the room. The house began to change in subtle ways. The oppressive silence lessened, replaced by the gentle sounds of chopping and simmering from the kitchen. It was in this slowly thawing environment that Amara met the other shadow in the house, a little girl named Hannah. Hannah was Tatsuya's niece, the daughter of a sister who had passed away years ago. She was 7 years old, with large, dark eyes that held the same haunted watchfulness as her uncle's. She moved through the vast mansion like a ghost, silent and solitary, trailed by a governess who seemed more like a warden. Amara first saw her peeking into the kitchen, her small face curious. Amara smiled, a warm, genuine expression that asked for nothing in return. Hannah darted away. The next day, she was back, lingering by the door a little longer. Amara was baking bread, and the warm, yeasty scent filled the air. "Would you like to help?" Amara asked gently. Hannah stared, her eyes wide with uncertainty, then shook her head and vanished. But the day after that, she returned. Amara had a small bowl of dough set aside on a flowered countertop. She didn't speak to Hannah directly. She simply began to knead the small piece of dough, her large, capable hands pressing and folding it with an easy rhythm. After a moment, Hannah took a tentative step into the kitchen. Then another. She stood beside Amara, watching. Amara pushed the small bowl toward her without a word. Hannah looked from the dough to Amara's kind face. Hesitantly, she put her small hands into the bowl and began to mimic Amara's movements. For the next hour, they worked in comfortable silence. By the end, Hannah had a small, lopsided loaf of her own. A tiny smile, the first anyone had seen in months, touched her lips. From that day on, Hannah was her shadow in the kitchen. She would help wash vegetables, stir pots, and sit at the large wooden table, drawing, while Amara cooked. Amara spoke to her not as a child to be managed, but as a companion, telling her stories about her own childhood, about the fireflies in the summer, and the taste of her grandmother's peach cobbler. Tatsuya observed it all from a distance. He would stand in the shadows of the hallway, watching his niece, who had been locked in a prison of silent grief, slowly coming back to life under the gentle care of this foreign woman. He saw Hana laugh for the first time when Amara let her wear a too-big apron. He heard her start to speak again, her small voice filling the kitchen with questions. Amara was not just feeding him, she was healing his home. This realization settled deep within him, a complex feeling of gratitude mixed with a cold, rising dread. Because in his world, anything of value, anything that brought light and warmth, inevitably became a target. News in the Tokyo underworld traveled not like a river, but like smoke, seeping through cracks and under doors, invisible and pervasive. The word on the street was that Tatsuya Ishikawa, the man who had been a ghost for 6 months, was recovering. He was seen more often. The iron grip of his organization, which had loosened slightly, was tightening once more. And his rivals were asking why. The answer came back, whispered in hushed tones, a woman. An American cook. This information found its way to Ryota Saito, the ambitious head of a rival clan and the man who had orchestrated the poisoning. Saito was a modern yakuza, a man who favored sharp suits over tattoos and corporate takeovers over street brawls. He had seen Tatsuya's withdrawal as an opportunity, a sign of weakness. This recovery was an inconvenience. He did not believe in sentiment. He believed in leverage. A man who trusts a cook can be broken by that cook. The first warning was subtle. A package delivered to the mansion's front gate. Inside, nestled on a bed of silk, was a single, perfectly crafted pastry from a famous French patisserie. There was no note, but Masaru, who inspected it, understood immediately. The pastry was from the same shop that had catered the dinner party where the poisoning had occurred. It was a message, elegant and chilling. We know who she is. We can reach anything she touches. The atmosphere in the mansion grew heavy again. The number of guards around the perimeter doubled. A dedicated man was assigned to shadow Amara on her weekly trips to the market. Masaru brought her into Tatsuya's office, a stark room dominated by a single piece of calligraphy that read "Duty." Tatsuya sat behind his desk, his face unreadable. "You have become important to this household," Masaru said, his voice grim. "That has made you a target." Amara looked from Masaru's worried face to Tatsuya's impassive one. She had felt the change, the eyes on her back, the whispers that fell silent when she entered a room. Fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but her voice was steady when she replied. "I am here to cook." Tatsuya spoke for the first time, his voice a low rumble. "Saito believes he has found a new weapon to use against me." "He believes that weapon is you." He leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "He is mistaken. You are not a weapon. You are a cook. But he will not understand that. He will try to use you. To buy you. Or to break you." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You can leave. A car will take you to the airport. You will be given enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. No one here will think less of you." It was an honorable exit, a chance for safety, a life free of this danger. Amara thought of Hannah's small hands covered in flour, of the flicker of life she had seen return to Tatsuya's eyes. She thought of the purpose she had found in this cold, lonely place. She met his gaze, without flinching. "Who would cook you your dinner, sir?" Her refusal to leave solidified her place in the house, but it also painted a target squarely on her back. Ryota Saito, having failed to intimidate, moved to the next phase of his plan: corruption. He did not believe in loyalty that could not be bought. One afternoon, during her supervised trip to the market, a black sedan pulled up beside her. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, his smile polished and insincere. Her guard immediately moved between them, his hand inside his jacket. The man from the car ignored him, his eyes fixed on Amara. "Ms. Washington," he said, his English perfect. "My employer, Mr. Saito, has a great admiration for your talents. He believes they are being wasted." He gestured to a briefcase held by another man. "He would like to offer you a position. Head of his culinary staff. The salary would be tenfold what you make now." a signing bonus of 100,000 American dollars. All you would have to do is accept. Amara looked at the man, her expression calm. I have a job, the man's smile tightened. Your current job is temporary and dangerous. Mr. Ishikawa is a man of fleeting interests. Mr. Saito offers stability and wealth. He paused, his voice dropping. He is also a man who does not like to be told no. He is merely asking for a small sign of goodwill. Information. What does Mr. Ishikawa discuss at his dinner table?
Who does he meet with?
Simple things. The offer hung in the air. Betray Tatsuya and become rich and safe. Her guard was rigid, ready for violence. But Amara simply shook her head, a slow, deliberate movement. I am paid to cook his meals, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I do not listen to his conversations. And I am not for sale. She turned and walked away, leaving the man standing on the sidewalk, his smile finally gone, replaced by a look of cold fury. When the incident was reported to Tatsuya, he said nothing. He simply sat in his office, staring at the chipped ceramic bowl which he now kept on a corner of his desk. Saito had made a critical error. He had assumed Amara was a pawn, a servant who could be bought like any other. He had failed to understand that her loyalty was not to the money or the power. It was a simple, profound principle. You do not betray the trust of the people you feed. He had underestimated her. And Tatsuya Ishikawa knew, with chilling certainty, that Saito would now move from bribery to force. The attack would come soon. He would have to be ready. The assault was more brazen than Tatsuya had anticipated. Saito, insulted by the refusal of a mere cook, decided to send a message of absolute power. He did not target Amara on the street. He targeted the one thing that would hurt Tatsuya even more. He targeted Hana. They waited until the girl's weekly trip to a small, private park with her governess. Two men, moving with practiced efficiency, subdued the governess and a single guard and grabbed the terrified child. But they had not counted on Amara. That day, she had felt a rare craving for a specific herb that only grew in a small pot in that very park's greenhouse. She had accompanied the outing, a few paces behind the main group. She saw the commotion, saw the man grab Hana, and she did not scream or run. A primal instinct, the fierce, unthinking courage of a mother bear, took over. She ran forward, her size giving her a momentum that surprised the kidnappers. She threw herself between the man and Hana, shielding the child with her body. You will not take her, she said, her voice low and trembling with adrenaline, but absolutely resolute. The man, momentarily stunned, snarled and raised a hand to strike her. He never got the chance. From the shadows of the park's edge, two of Tatsuya's elite guards emerged. They were the invisible protection he had placed around Amara and Hana, men she had never even known were there. The fight was brutally short. The would-be kidnappers were disarmed and incapacitated with terrifying speed. One of Tatsuya's men spoke urgently into his wrist. Package is secure. Hostiles neutralized. Minutes later, Tatsuya's car screeched to a halt beside them. He burst out of the back, his face a storm of cold fury. His eyes scanned the scene, taking in the subdued men, the pale-faced governess, and finally, Amara, who was still holding a crying Hana, murmuring soothing words to her. He walked directly to them. He knelt, ignoring everyone else, and gently took Hana from Amara's arms, holding his niece close. He looked at Amara, who was shaking now that the danger had passed. He saw the terror in her eyes, but beneath it, the bedrock of her defiance. He saw the scratch on her cheek, where one of the men had lashed out. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before his thumb gently brushed her cheek, his touch surprisingly soft. It was the first time he had ever touched her. They will not touch you again, he said, and it was not a promise. It was a vow, a declaration of war. That night, as the entire underworld held its breath, Tatsuya's retribution began. But in the quiet of his mansion, a profound shift had occurred. Amara was no longer just his cook. She had proven she was willing to lay down her life for his family. And Tatsuya realized he was willing to burn the world down to protect hers. Here is the part of the story nobody saw coming. Here is what you need to understand about a man like Tatsuya Ishikawa. His trust was not broken by a simple assassination attempt. It was shattered by a deep, personal betrayal. The poison that nearly killed him had not been in a fancy, catered dish. It had been in a bowl of katsudon, a simple pork cutlet over rice. It was his favorite comfort food, the meal his mother used to make for him as a boy. And it had been served to him by his oldest, most trusted bodyguard, a man who had been with him for 20 years, a man he loved like a brother. Saito had found that man's weakness, a gambling debt, and had turned him. The poison was a betrayal of his position, but serving it in that specific dish was a betrayal of his soul. It had tainted the one pure memory Tatsuya had left. So when he had sat, starving, for 6 months, he was not just afraid of poison. He was starving from a wound to his spirit. He believed that trust itself was an illusion, that loyalty was a commodity, and that anything good could and would be corrupted. And then Amara had walked in. The reason her beef stew had broken through that wall was not just because it was warm and comforting. It was something far more profound, a coincidence so powerful it felt like fate. The specific blend of herbs she used, the way she browned the flour for the gravy, the hint of soy and mirin she added for depth. It was an American recipe, but through some strange culinary alchemy, it was nearly identical to his own mother's long-lost recipe. A recipe no one else knew. A recipe he himself had only a vague, sensory memory of. When he tasted that first spoonful, he was not just tasting beef and carrots. He was tasting a forgotten Sunday afternoon in a small, sunlit kitchen. He was hearing his mother's laughter. He was feeling a moment of pure, unconditional love from a time before his life had been defined by violence and suspicion. In that moment, the stew did more than feed his body. It spoke to the part of him that had been poisoned long before Sato's assassins had ever made their move. It felt like a message from the only person he had ever truly, completely trusted. It gave him a reason to take a chance, to believe, just for a moment, that something good could enter his life, without an ulterior motive. He had never told anyone this. He had locked it away, a secret, irrational hope. But her actions in the park confirmed it. Her loyalty, her protective instinct, was as pure and unpretentious as her cooking. It was real, and it had reawakened something inside him he thought had died forever. The war with Ryota Saito was swift and total. Tatsuya dismantled his rival's empire not with the hot rage of vengeance, but with the cold, methodical precision of a surgeon excising a cancer. Sato's businesses were ruined, his alliances broken, his men scattered. Within a month, his name was nothing but a cautionary tale whispered in the dark corners of the city. But the real transformation was happening inside the Ishikawa mansion. The silence was gone, replaced by the sound of life. Hana's laughter now echoed in the hallways. She followed Amara everywhere, a happy, chattering companion. The house, once a fortress of sorrow, had become a home. Amara was no longer just an employee. She was the gravitational center around which this strange, new family revolved. One evening, Tatsuya found her in the kitchen long after dinner, quietly sipping tea and looking out at the rain-slicked garden. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. The peace she carried with her was a balm to his own restless spirit. "Amara," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. She turned, a small smile on her face. "Sir," he walked into the kitchen and stood before her. He seemed to be searching for words, a rare state for a man whose commands were always clear and direct. "This house was a tomb," he said finally. "I was its keeper. You came here, and you brought it back to life." He looked around the warm, bright room. "Hana is happy. She is healing. I am whole." He met her eyes, and the carefully constructed mask of the oyabun was gone. In its place was just a man, vulnerable and sincere. "This is not a position I can pay you for. It is not a job. It is the heart of this house. Of this family." He took a small breath. "I am asking you to stay. Not as my cook. As my wife. As Hana's mother. As the heart of my life." Amara was speechless. She looked at this powerful, dangerous man, and she saw the profound loneliness he had carried for so long. She saw the man who kept a chipped bowl on his desk as a reminder of his first taste of hope. She thought of the little girl who now held her hand and called her Auntie Alma. She had come here for a job, but she had found a home and a family she had never expected. Tears welled in her eyes as she gave him her answer. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Months later, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the immaculate garden behind the mansion. The air was warm, filled with the scent of blooming camellias and freshly cut grass. Tatsuya Ishikawa sat on a simple wooden bench, a small plate of sliced fruit and cheese on the table beside him. He was wearing a simple cotton shirt, not a suit, and the fearsome tattoos that covered his arms were visible in the soft light. He looked relaxed, content, a man at peace in his own home. A few feet away, Hannah was chasing butterflies, her laughter bright and carefree. She no longer looked like a small, sad ghost. She was a child, vibrant and full of joy. The screen door to the house slid open, and Amara walked out, carrying a tray with 2 glasses of iced tea. She was his wife now, the mistress of the house. But she still moved with the same quiet, unassuming grace. She set the tray down and sat beside him, her presence a familiar comfort. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Hannah play. After a moment, he picked up a slice of apple from the plate and ate it without a second thought. For him, every meal was now an act of love, an affirmation of the trust that Amara had rebuilt within him, piece by piece. She had not just saved him from starvation, she had saved him from the prison of his own past. He looked at her, at the strength and kindness in her face, and he knew he was the luckiest man in the world. He had built an empire on fear, but she had built him a kingdom of warmth. The little chipped bowl still sat on his desk, but it was no longer a reminder of a dark time. It was a monument to the moment his life had begun again. The story of the fearsome Yakuza boss and his American cook became a quiet legend in the underworld, a strange fable about the unexpected power of a simple meal and of a love that healed the deepest of wounds. What do you think is the most powerful way to show someone you care? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe for more. I will see you in the next one.